Okay, I want to make a video here about why I think there shouldn't be an Elder Scrolls 6 at all, period, okay? Tentative title. And that's mainly because Bethesda, I think, is at a point where there's a couple of things happening. One, they've taken too long, okay? And number two, they've exhausted the whole lore of what made Elder Scrolls work. And I think that after the ending that we got in Skyrim, the franchise needs to die and they need to do something else. Because what they're doing now is destroying their IPs, right? That's what they're doing. They're destroying their IPs. And I don't want to see the Elder Scrolls get decimated. They've made a lot of changes. Like, understand, the very first three games, the UI was about an RNG system. The storytelling was epic. It was amazing. The lore was incredible, in the first three games, okay? But then I talk about shallow, superficial things like the lack of certain spells and wall climbing and things like that. But when we get into the lore, the actual storytelling of what makes Elder Scrolls so fantastic is the storytelling, the characters, the depth of the characters. And when we see this getting watered down, which each version, until they finally turned it into an online service, which was a total discredit towards those of us that actually follow the Elder Scrolls games and actually understand the lore, it's basically insulting us at this point. And I think Elder Scrolls 6, because they've taken so long, I don't think they know what to do with it. And I'm not talking about technology. I'm talking about story. I'm talking about lore. I'm talking about history. I'm talking about the depth of what Elder Scrolls was supposed to be about and how along the way it's lost its way, and you really see it in Skyrim. And I'm not Skyrim bashing, I'm just saying you really see it. And you can say that the fall of the Elder Scrolls franchise started with Oblivion, you know, because it became westernized by becoming an action RPG instead of an RNG system, which is what they had before, right? In the other three. But story wise, it still was really compelling because you weren't the hero in Oblivion, right? So because you weren't the hero in Oblivion, that's what made it so awesome. You were nothing but a messenger. You happen to be there when the emperor comes through and he ends up dying and he tells you that he saw you in his dreams and he goes, "This is the day I'm going to die," and gives you the amulet and tells you to go see Joffrey. And then Joffrey goes off and gives it to his nephew. And, well, if you know the story, you know the lore behind Oblivion and what it's really about. It's not about you. And this is why I struggle with Skyrim, and the lore of Skyrim being an Elder Scrolls game, is because automatically you're Dragonborn. And it doesn't take that much for you to become Dragonborn. And then automatically every single crime that you commit, except for maybe murder, is written off. And they go, okay, just don't do it again. And you know you're going to do it again because you can get away with it. Why wouldn't you? Of course you would. Any rational human being would do that, right? And that's what really bothers me about Skyrim the most, right? It's not just that we lost the character sheets, which is superficial. It's not just that we lost spells, which is superficial, and creating spells, which is superficial, but it's lost its way with the lore and the storytelling, you know. And what makes Elder Scrolls actually work as Elder Scrolls? Just because you slap the title Elder Scrolls on there doesn't mean that it's true. And this goes for all, by the way. My rule of thumb is everything should only be one title or be a trilogy, but no longer than a trilogy. Everything. Movies, TV, books, everything should always just be a trilogy maximum. There should be a beginning, a middle, and an end, and have that in mind, you know? And you see this being the problem with Mortal Kombat right now, because they rebooted the whole thing and said, oh no, none of that exists anymore. And they really went way, way, way out in left field with their storytelling to the point where you're like, I'm done. If you're an original fan of the original trilogy of Mortal Kombat, you got to say by this new one that came out, Mortal Kombat 1, that it's an insult to the brand, literally. And this is the problem with these companies. I'm using that as an example so it doesn't seem like I'm hating on Bethesda. I hate on the whole industry because the industry is about greed right now, power and control. And all of them are losing their way with their IPs. And when you start to go down that rabbit hole, if you don't want your fans to, for lack of a better way, because I don't believe in hatred, but to hate on you, then you got to respectfully know when to go, okay, we're done, let's come up with something new. And I think that that's where we're at now. I think Starfield was supposed to be that something new, but fans went, we reject it because it's not the old Bethesda. And what the problem here is for me with Starfield was the pronouns, and it was forced onto you. There's a difference if I have a choice. But when I don't have a choice and that's removed from me, then I have to go by my faith, my religion, and that is Christianity. Now, a lot of people fire back at me in the comments and go, well, how can you play these games? And if they go against, because they involve stealing, they involve this. I go, yeah, that's true. They do. Absolutely. That's why I made Christian builds. That's why I made True Passives builds. That's why I make all these different builds. You guys can choose how you want to play the game. So yes, you can do this as a lawful good character. Yes, you can do this with good constitution. Yes, you can do this as a Christian. You know? And my #1 viewed video on Skyrim was the Christian build. Go look at it. A lot of people wrote back saying, I got to give this a shot, man. I got to try this. This sounds interesting. And I made a playthrough of it, you know, showing how I did it. And they said, man, God bless you if you do this in real life. But I don't see why you're doing it in a video game. Because if I do it in a video game, guys, you guys are going to watch it. And then you're going to learn something about being a Christian and what Christianity is about. How can I teach you about God and Jesus Christ if you don't watch my videos about God and Jesus Christ? Then maybe I can teach you through a video game. Isn't that interesting, right? And then you start to learn and understand and go, oh, so that's what that's about. And then you start asking all sorts of questions. And then I put that in the playthrough. So not only are you being entertained, but you're learning too as well, and you're becoming spiritually awake. You see? Now I know that's off topic completely, but that's how the Holy Spirit works. You know, it speaks when it wants to. Trying to get back to what I'm trying to say here is that they lost the lore. They lost their history. They lost their ability to tell good stories. And I think the franchise just needs to die. And I honestly think, and I'm going to inject this, okay, into here before I wrap this up. I honestly think that we need to not buy Elder Scrolls 6 when it does come out. Because I think, honestly, they're going to make the worst game ever. Not just based off of what's going on with Starfield and wokeism and all this other stuff and UI and stuff and all that kind of stuff, right? But because of the lore, the storytelling. They've been away from it for so long, I don't think they know where to start. And because of that, that's why I think the franchise just needs to die and end. And I think it should end with Skyrim. Because when you look at the ending to Skyrim, and I've tried to keep this spoiler free, but if you understand the true ending to Skyrim, if you understand the true war between, you know, the Empire and the Stormcloaks and the Civil War, the other one, you know, like, you know, with the, oh, what are they called? You know what I mean? There's two of them that goes on, right? There's the Battleborns and the Greybeards, and then there's the Empire and the Stormcloaks, right? Those are the two wars going on. And the Battleborn is the Empire, okay? And when you understand the stories that are going on here and the things that are being said, it's pretty awesome, the storytelling. I'll say that. We lost a lot of content. We got a really watered down version of what Elder Scrolls used to be. But the story and the lore is still there. But I think it's time to just end it. Because when you look at the true ending of this, if you understand the true ending, if you understand what you should have done with Alduin, okay, and you understand what this is really all about, there's really nowhere to go with the story anymore. Like, this actually kills the franchise completely because there is no other place to go. And this is just my humbled opinion about this, you know, because as I look back at all the games and I understand the context of how they started and how they ended, and then how the next one started and how it ends, and so on and so forth, and we get to number 5, I see no reason for a number 6. Like, none. I don't see what direction they could possibly go in from here, because there is none. Eventually, like I said, everything has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And you have to make that your template. You know? And I think that this is why the first 3 games were so loved, and still loved to this day, with Daggerfall still being the best in the franchise as far as I'm concerned. But even Morrowind has that lore behind it. I mean, Morrowind, you know, if you have this on console, okay, and you don't mod it, and you play it as it is, and you don't call it a reading simulator, you're in for a real treat. Morrowind is epically awesome in every way that I can think of. You really have to think your way through it. There is no waypoints or markers or anything. And if you lose your way because of your journal, because you got too many things going on, you're going to get lost, man. Like, you really had to keep track of everything in Morrowind, literally. And you had to make sure not to go too far until you were done that one quest before you went on with another one, because I tell you something, you'll lose your way. Because you keep a journal, an actual real journal. And whatever you write in that journal, oh man, that's your directions on where to go and what to do when you get there. And if you got it mixed up with other directions from other people telling you to go here or there and everything else, you got a big problem. If you join too many fractions at one time and you got too many things going on like you do in Skyrim, they don't show you the way. You got to go back to your journal and figure it out. That Morrowind is freaking epic, okay? And maybe I change my stance on Oblivion and I go with Morrowind, you know? Because Morrowind, man, you can levitate in that too. You got that RNG system and everything else. Maybe I should show you guys some gameplay of Morrowind and you understand what I'm talking about. Because the lore behind it, man, the storytelling was just amazing. And you could actually see the hatred of certain races because of where it takes place. But it is all brown, though. Keep that in mind. It's all brown for a reason, because it's Morrowind. You know what I'm saying? And there's no voiceovers. It's all reading. You have to read. You know, and this really shows me how lazy people are, right? Maybe I should do some gameplay for you, you know? And you can see what I'm talking about. Because that game is friggin' amazing. And still is to this day. And the only thing I wish that they would do is just give it a graphical upgrade. That's it. I don't want them to touch a single thing about the story. The story is epic, you know? If anything needs an upgrade, it would be Morrowind. Morrowind is such a beautiful game. It's incredible, but I cringe on that because of how they disrespected Oblivion. But that's a different story. I honestly think the franchise needs to die. I think they hit their peak with Morrowind in the end. When I start to really just reflect on this and I understand the stories and that, yeah, Oblivion makes sense too. You're a messenger, you know. You're not the main focus. You know, the problem with Skyrim is that you're Dragonborn. You know, you're worshipped, and I say this with a small g, as if you're God, right? Whereas in the previous ones, you're not. You know, you're just a nobody. You know, and they're so awesome. I mean, Morrowind really blows me away. You know, like the world building and the depth of the characters and the depth of the storytelling is probably at its peak right in Morrowind. And I think it is at its peak. And in Oblivion, I think the reason why people are fascinated by Oblivion, and I could be guilty of this because of the dopamine, is because it went action RPG. It was westernized instead of, you know, and there's only two Western games, understand this. The rest of them were RNG games, right? Okay, you had to read, and boy, did you have to read, you know. Whereas Oblivion and On, which is just Oblivion and Skyrim, there's only two. They went westernized with action, you know, and they had voiceovers, and you didn't have much reading to do. Or all you had to do was pop open a book and it would just automatically pop up with a quest marker. So if you're not into reading, you're going to hate Morrowind, but I'm going to tell you this, if you're an Elder Scrolls fan and you really want to understand what lore is all about, you got to go play Morrowind. Like, Morrowind is a must. If you really want to understand Elder Scrolls, you need Morrowind. That's just the bottom line. You got to play that game. There's nothing like it out there. Like, literally nothing. And I think that's the problem now. And I think that's why I have such a disdain for Skyrim. Is because it sours what Morrowind represented, you know. And the storytelling isn't as good as people think it is. See, they think Skyrim is the best game ever made, period. Like, there's a lot of claims on YouTube by this, but it's younger people. And it's people that's never gone back and played the older ones. And you need a refresher by going to Morrowind and play at least that, because that's on console too, right? Don't use mods, because it ruins the whole immersion factor. And I talk about that in another video, okay? Don't use mods. I talk about that when I talk about Serena. You know, I did a video about theory, you know, about Serena and why she is the way that she is and why you can't marry her and how that destroys the lore of the game, the whole point to it, right? When it comes to her character. And that's why I'm against modding, you know, because it destroys what was there by putting something that doesn't exist and forcing it into the canonized version of the game, that it breaks the game and ruins it. And I'm talking about storytelling. I'm talking about lore. I'm talking, you know what I mean? I honestly think that when people look at these games, they don't understand the lore at all. You know, they don't understand the history and what Elder Scrolls really is about. And I think the pinnacle of the series is definitely Morrowind now. You know, I'm an Oblivion fan, but I think I'm not anymore. I think I'm going back to Morrowind because I have them both on Xbox, right? Maybe that's what I should do, is a playthrough of that and show you why it's so amazing. But that's if you're willing to go through the reading or hearing me talk about the reading. You let me know down below if you want to read it or if you want me to read it to you. Because there is a lot of reading. But in that reading, it's just amazing at the world building that they did. I mean, if you go back to the old PC games, right? Like, oh, what's a good example? Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Um, Man, there were some D&D ones. What were they now? I'm trying to think of them. There's this one that had like three parts to it. It was really awesome. I can't think of it right now. I got a brain freeze. I'm sorry. It was all text. It's a really, really old game, like back in the 80s, you know? Really awesome. It's like Ultima, you know, that kind of stuff, right? It was really, really incredible, you know? But I was reading, nothing but reading. And that's all it was text, and then you made choices. And based off your choices, it would tell you what would happen next, right? If you guys know the game, mention it in the comments and I'll let you know if that's it, you know? I know exactly what I'm thinking of. I just can't get I got the image in my head, but I can't get the name in my head. You know what I mean? That was awesome. And that's what I'm talking about. Because the problem is nowadays with modern technology is we become too immersed into dopamine of in the sense that it's all about cinematics, right? It's all about movies. And we lost our way with how amazing things can be done with the imagination of the reader. And when you immerse yourself in that world and the lore and the building of it, you realize just how epically awesome Morrowind truly was and how ahead of its time it still is. And then you understand why I have such a disdain for Skyrim because it lost all that. And some people will point it out to me, and they got a point here that it started with Oblivion, and there is a point there to be made, you know. But man, did we get a watered down version of Elder Scrolls with Skyrim. And this has nothing to do with Starfield. It just has to do with the fact that they lost their way with the stories. They lost their direction. They lost what the lore and everything, you know. And you even see that in ESO. And you know, I played it a bit. I'm guilty of that. I, you know, ended up with a copy somehow, like, you know, free or on sale, $6 or something. I thought I'd check it out, but I wouldn't go any further. And when I figured out that it was a scheme because you needed the endless crafting bag, the only way to get that was through subscription, I went, I'm done. I'm walking away, you know. And plus, you needed a group of people to play online that would allow you to hear the story. That was another problem I had because everybody would just blast through it. And it's like, yo, I'm here to get the story. That's why I hate online gaming because you can't get the story with other people. They overtalk you, they blast through the content, and you're there. What the heck is this all about? I'm not here just to grind and, you know, and blast through this 20 times. I want the stories, you know? That turned me off completely of ESO. So I think that's what the real problem is when I stop and look back at it. And I think the pinnacle was Morrowind, and I think they should have stopped there. I really do. And we can start to see the decline with Oblivion, and we really get a really watered down version with Skyrim. And I think it needs to end. You know, it just they just need to stop and come up with a new IP altogether. And I think that's what they should do with Starfield. And they should be focused on Starfield 2, as in number 2, and listen to the fans' criticism of the first one. Get rid of the forced pronouns so that people like myself that are Christian can play, and build a more interesting universe for us to explore. Because from what I understand, it's barren. And I watch MK Ice and Fire. That's the channel I go to for everything. Because they don't talk, they just play. And they play the whole thing. And they show you all the content. And you get to see and judge for yourself, which is really cool. you know. That's one thing I'm grateful for because we don't have demos anymore and we don't have trials and we need those. But they want you to pay for that. No, I'm not doing that. People go, oh no, it's free with EA Plus. No, you got to pay for EA Plus. You got to pay for Ubisoft Plus, you know? It's not free. It's a subscription. You're being fooled. You're being tricked. You're being deceived. They say, look, it's free with Xbox, Game Pass. No, Game Pass costs money, you know? Like that's what I've been trying to say all along. None of those demos and trials are free. You want to play hockey? You want to play the demo of it or the trial? You got to buy EA Plus. No, 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 no. No, it's not free. And that's another problem in the industry, but it's separate. But the main thing here, the main point I'm trying to say is that they just need to stop. They do. Like, I read your comments, and I'm still going through them that are like 2 weeks old or more. So I'm trying to catch up to you guys. I apologize. I'm only one person. I don't have a team that works for me. It's just me, man. You get the real me. But I can honestly say that a lot of you guys make a lot of really interesting points. And I think the number one point is I think in the end this thing just needs to die. I think people shouldn't buy ES6. I don't think we should be getting hyped about it because the series just needs to die. They don't know what they're doing with it, literally. And so for single players like myself and others like me, because they spend so much time in Elder Scrolls Online, I don't think they know what they're doing when it comes to the single player experience. And I think they lost their way with the lore and everything else. And I think they just don't know where to go with this. They become too big of a company that they lost the whole heart and soul of the company. Because now they're owned by Xbox, which is Microsoft. And now they got a new boss, and Todd Howard is just another employee. He's not in charge anymore. He acts like the boss, but all he is a lemon car salesman, at best. He's not the director like he used to be. He doesn't have the final say. Microsoft does. And ZeniMax, but Microsoft bought ZeniMax too. So, we're SOL, you understand that, right? Like modern gaming, you're better off going back to the retro stuff and playing that over and over and over again and finding different ways to play it than you are to play this new stuff. And I'm going to tell you this right now, you're not going to like it, but retro is the way to go now. And just ignore modern gaming altogether. Play what you have. Be grateful for the great storytelling you got and the great characters and everything like that. And then just leave it at that. Because Elder Scrolls 6 will disappoint you massively. Especially if you know the lore and history of Elder Scrolls. And you see that in Skyrim, And it was pointed out to me that it actually started in Oblivion and they got a point there. I admit when I could be wrong about things, So I go back and I play Morrowind and I look at Morrowind and I go, oh man, this is where they should have stopped because this was the pinnacle, This is why I believe in trilogies. I believe either one and that's it and move on to a new IP, or I believe in trilogies. Because there's always got to be a beginning, a middle, and an end. And the way Morrowind does it, they do it so well, that's where it should end. Then we got Oblivion. We're not the hero still, which is a good thing. But then we get Skyrim, and then we become Dragonborn just like that in a blink of an eye. And it's like, are you serious, man? Like, this is where you're going with this? So I can commit any crime but murder and you're good with that? And this is why, there's a lot of reasons behind why I don't like Skyrim. But that's because I'm a fan of Elder Scrolls. And if you're a fan of Elder Scrolls, there's no way you can like Skyrim. And you have to realize that Elder Scroll, or sorry, that Skyrim is the killer of Elder Scrolls 6 because it's so watered down. Even the lore and the storyteller and the character building, where is it? I killed a cave bear today, and there's no conversation, you know? You go back to Morrowind. Literally, please do yourself a favor. Pick up a copy of Morrowind. It's on Xbox, so you can get it on the PC. Don't mod it. That's important for immersion reasons, okay? Don't have it text to speech kind of stuff, okay? Don't do that stuff. Read it, follow it, and understand what makes Morrowind. I think it's the pinnacle. I really do. Now that I look back on it and I recognize it for what it is, I'm thinking about doing a playthrough now of it, and I just might start it today. Go through all through the Christmas break, doing nothing but Morrowind, just to show you guys, what it's like, eh? I think they cook themselves. I do. I just don't see where they can go without ruining the franchise even further. And I'm talking about the lore in that here. I'm not talking about wokeism or anything else. I'm concerned about that too. But I'm mainly concerned about the lore and the storytelling, the character building, the world building. There we go. World building, right? And we go back to Morrowind. Wow, was that epic? That's the pinnacle right there. That's the granddaddy of them all. I think Morrowind killed the whole franchise. You don't get any better than Morrowind. Graphically, you can, but not with the storytelling and the immersion. And don't do quality of life improvements to it, please. Because the whole point to it is that you had to pay attention to the finer details. You had to read your journal and you had to follow it right to the T, or else you get lost really quick. And then you get a whole bunch of different, quests to do. That the one you left behind way back on page 5 and you're on page 50, there's no way you're going to figure that out because you didn't follow it through. So you got to keep that in mind when you play Morrowind, man. You got to make sure that you're on top of things. You can't just blindly walk around like you can in Skyrim, because if you do that, you're going to be lost. You're not going to know what the Hannah is going on, And it starts off with you going with the blades, but then all this other stuff pops up, eh? So it sounds like my food might be here, so I might have to go, guys. So I'm just going to end it with that. I think they cooked it. I think it just needs to die. I'm not going to buy Elder Scrolls 6, no matter how good it looks. They're just not going to be able to do good storytelling like they used to. They're just not going to put the time and effort into it, And I think that that's the biggest disdain I have for Skyrim. And you see what they did with Starfield, But I'm talking about the lore of Elder Scrolls, so I'm just sticking with Elder Scrolls. I'm not even involving Starfield. I'm saying when you go back and you play Morrowind, look at how amazing that was. And then the people that told me, well, look at Oblivion, you keep promoting it, that's actually the start of the decline of it. And then I started thinking to myself, okay, well, if I see Skyrim being so watered down, then what's going on with Oblivion? And then I go back to Morrowind and I go, that's you know what I mean? I don't want to swear, I don't want to cuss, but you know what I'm saying, okay? That's the bomb, okay? That's the mother lode. And that was so epic and that was so awesome, that's where they should have stopped. There's such a thing as doing too much. We see this with Star Wars, right? George Lucas originally meant for Star Wars, A New Hope, to have a beginning, middle, and end because he didn't see it being a trilogy or anything else because he didn't think it was going to be a success at all. Then he comes back and he finds out it was a success and then he turns it into a trilogy. And then it turns into 6, and then he says, oh no, it's meant to be 9. No, it was only meant to be Star Wars: A New Hope, and that's it. The rest of it isn't canon. That was canon. They had their beginning, their middle, and their end, and that's it. Star Wars is done. So George Lucas, in his own greed, went way too far with it. And that's the problem with Bethesda. That's the problem with everything. You look at Halo and look at where it's at, right? You look at Gears of War and look at, come on, like, seriously. Man, it was all about Marcus and Dom, you know? That's what it was about. And you get into the new stuff and you're just like, you lost me. You know, you completely lost me. And you can do this with any game. You can do it with fighting games. You can do it with RPGs. You can do it with whatever, you know? And you see how they lost their way. And that's my main concern. I'm not interested in Elder Scrolls 6 because I don't want to ruin what Elder Scrolls means to me. I would highly recommend that you be really, really cautious and careful when it comes to Elder Scrolls 6. And I would invite you to go back to Morrowind, literally, and play it. No mods. Because of immersion factors, okay? No mods. No text to speech. Read it. Play through it. And then when you come back from that, you're going to look at everything completely different. And then you see why I hate Skyrim so much, because it's so watered down. Even the storytelling is watered down. It's not as good as people think. And people would go back to the old stuff, they would find out why. They're like, it's the game of all games, and it's not. It's the best game ever made. No, NHL 94 took that title. That's why they came up with Rewind, you know. Everybody who plays hockey says that's the game and it's the GOAT and it's the GOAT of all games, period. And they got a point. But separate issue, because I'm just looking at Elder Scrolls, you know. I don't want ES6 to come out. I don't. Now I don't want it to come out. Because the more and more I contemplate, and this is why this video is continuing, because I'm doing it while I'm contemplating, the more and more I do that, the more and more I realize just how amazing Morrowind really was. And I have it. And I can play it right now and show you. And I think people need to go back to that experience to truly understand what Elder Scrolls was always meant to be about. Because most people grew up with Oblivion. Morrowind was the first one to hit console. But Oblivion was most people's first experience. And a lot of people, because you guys are in your 20s or 30s, you guys' experience was with Skyrim. What you need to do is go back to Morrowind and play that. And I'm not joking. Please don't mod it. And don't do text to speech. Read it. Leave it as is, the way the developers intended it. Because that's about the immersion. You want a real challenge? Go back and play Morrowind, please. Seriously, I'm asking you. Please go back and play Morrowind. And then you really understand where I'm coming from. See, I'm an older person from an older generation that grew up with Arena, Daggerfall, and Morrowind, right? Morrowind was the first one to hit the console. And it exploded. But then, yeah, you know, the person who pointed out to me about Oblivion, they got a really good point there. You know, they do. Morrowind was the go. And that's where it should have stopped. Because now, look at them. They don't know what they're doing. And I think that that's why they haven't made ES6. Because I don't think they know where to go with it. I don't think they know what to do. I think they lost their way because they've been so far away from the lore and the world building that they don't know how to do it. So I'm just going to leave it at that. My recommendation, guys, is go back to Morrowind and check it out for yourself, you know. Experience it, you know, live it.
Get immersed in it. Ignore the graphics, ignore the reading, and do it. Don't go to YouTube for help. Just play it blind and you'll go bonkers. But man, if you get through it and you finish it, kudos, because you're in for the ride of your life. And then you'll really understand where I'm coming from. You got to play Morrowind, guys. Everybody's got it. You got it on Xbox, you got it on, PC, you got it everywhere, right? Do yourself a favor, go play Morrowind now, okay? I'll do a playthrough myself. And man, picking your class was important. Everything was important, man. Paying attention to your journal, extremely important. And what everybody had to say about everything, extremely important. I mean, it starts with a package you deliver to Clayus or something like that. I'm trying to remember his name. He's the leader of the Blaze, and then he puts you on an assignment. So you can't just go out and do whatever you want to do. You could, but you're going to get everything mixed up in your journal, and you're not going to be able to figure it out heads from tails. Trust me on this. That is an awesome game. I don't think I'll ever come back to how great Morrowind really was. And now I have an even deeper appreciation for it now that I reflect on it. So I would encourage you to go and play Morrowind, guys. Don't buy Elder Scrolls 6. Don't. Stop looking forward to it. Appreciate what you got and play what you got. But if you really want to understand the lore, you really want to understand the history, you really want to understand what Elder Scrolls was really about, go back to Morrowind. And skip this woke garbage and this LGBT theme stuff. It's all a bunch of bonkers. It's crazy. It's BS. So that's my final thoughts on that. I am not going to get into Elder Scrolls 6. I'm going to go back to Morrowind. That's what I'm going to do. That was just amazing. You know, I talk a lot about Oblivion, but I think now it's time to talk about Morrowind. You know, and just how amazing that was. I mean, I hear about people crying out for a remake of it or a remaster, and I'm just like, I cringe and I go, well, look at what they did with Oblivion. Are you sure you want that? I don't want them to change anything. If they're going to change anything, then change the graphics and make them better, but make it the way the world was meant to be. Not in your image, but the image of what the developers made it. And that's the problem with Oblivion. They took a bright and beautiful world and turned it into a murky, gross, disgusting one that was depressing. That's why I didn't like the remake. And it is a remake of Oblivion. It's because it was so dark and depressing. The sewers are bad enough. But when you get out of the sewers and you pop out into the world, you're like, wow, look at all the colors. It's so vibrant. Everything pops out. Fantastic world to get lost in. Then the remake comes along and, holy Hannah, you left it depressing. No wonder everyone's got problems with depression nowadays. Look at this stuff you play, I'm just saying. Anyway, I'm kind of like going off left field here. You get the idea. Go back to Morrowind and check it out. I think you're going to love it if you can get past the reading. And I pray that you do because you're in for one heck of a wild ride. Thank you for your time. I know I take up a lot of your time. But hey, guys, I'm older than you, man. And I'm feeling it. I don't know how much time I have left on this planet. So if I'm taking the time to do this, please take the time to watch. And thank you to those that do. And those that comment, even more so. I like your thoughts about that, actually. I like to know what you guys think about all this, right? The lore, the storytelling, the world building, the characters, the depth, the backstory, the history, right? I think it should have ended with Morrowind now.
that I think about it. Morrowind was amazing. Anyway, thanks a lot for your time, guys. God bless. Have a good day.